powers that be in some places are changing the rules of the game, and so the emergence is changing as well, and the possibilities for that, and the organising that is happening is different. There is just a different coming together of people. And I think that's where, going back to the cake, is actually the baking powder that literally gives rise to the cake. The smallest ingredient actually changes the whole cake. And if we think about that for ourselves, like maybe we feel like we're the smallest person or have the smallest impact, but we don't actually know how that will change the entire system.
Leona and Looby, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. So, because we have a 3-person team today, we'll go to Leona first. Leona, how are you and where are you on this glorious spring day?
I am in the north of England today, Hebden Bridge, my home, having just been in a very, very wet Spain for 2 weeks. So I'm really, really grateful for the blue skies and crispness of this morning. It's gorgeous outside.
Did I not know you were in Hebden Bridge? My aunt used to live in Todmorden when I was a kid, so I spent a distressing amount of time in Hebden Bridge, and it's gorgeous.
It is a
Big steep hills and grey houses, but really lovely people. Hey, alrighty. So, Looby, how are you and where are you this glorious spring morning?
Well, certainly the sunshine is helping my mood and my energy levels, so I'm feeling pretty good this morning. And I am not far from you, Manda. I'm in the borderland between Wales and England in Herefordshire in the UK, and my home, which is Applewood Permaculture Centre. I'm enjoying spring here.
Yeah, it's glorious, actually. It's much easier to feel equanimity at the state of the world when the glory of the sun is up there. We just have to, if it lasts for more than a week, I start panicking about the fact we haven't had any rain, which is something to do with the nature of watching the land and seeing how it goes. So we have so many inspiring things that you two do together that we really want to bring to the world today. So, Looby, Cultural Emergence is what unites you and Leona. Tell us, to begin with, what it is and what brought you to it.
Well, it is a whole toolkit for change. It's got practices and principles. It's also a growing global movement. So lots of people are getting engaged from all over the world, and we're currently working on translating the CEED deck, which is the Cultural Emergence Empowerment and Design deck, which is a deck that I created to distill all the tools into bite-sized chunks. And
show us, because for the people on the video, so the CEED deck is a card deck.
There we go.
So if you happen to be on YouTube, you can see it, and if you're not, we will put a picture of that in the show notes on the website page.
So it's a card deck which kind of distills all the wisdom from my book Cultural Emergence.
Beautiful.
And
fantastic.
So maybe we'll play with it a bit later in this cast. And
what are you translating it into?
Well, we put the call out for who wants to translate it just on my newsletter, and we had something amazing like 19 different languages of people saying, yes, I want it in Hungarian, I want it in Scottish Gaelic, I want it in like French, Portuguese and Hebrew. Someone's trying to work on a Hebrew and Arabic like bilingual translation in there. So that's in process at the moment. So that's very live. So so it's a global movement as well as of people using this toolkit. And the toolkit itself evolved, and the whole project evolved between a collaboration with myself and John Young, who's over in the States and founded the 8 Shields movement, which Leona can probably share a bit more about because that's her journey into this as well. We came together, and I had already written People and Permaculture, which again I can show to.
Well done, you are organised.
I happen to have them around me at all times. And they, so we came together. I'd already written People and Permaculture, and then someone had read that who collaborated with John and said, you two really should get together and do something together. And we said, okay, well, let's do a course together and see what happens. His work is really about nature connection and cultural repair. How do we create cultural repair so that we all are nature connected? And then we said, well, actually, we could just kind of work with what I do and normally do and what you do normally do, and that's all together. Or we could go into the space in between and grow something new from this collaboration. And that was really an exciting thing that we did, that we said, yeah, okay, let's try this. And then the whole framing of cultural emergence came out of that. And then out of that framing and that course, the whole toolkit evolved over a few years, which then I put into the book and the card deck, and have really been investing in the project and the growth, and collaborating with people like Leona, bringing them in and their wisdom in to harvest more collective wisdom to help grow the movement. So that's where it came from, and we can explore more culture and emergence more, but that's the basic.
Okay, thank you. So, Leona, Looby's given us a bit of a framework of cultural emergence and John Young bringing you two together. What was it that enabled him to see that you were going to be a key part of this partnership? What do you bring, and how did you get to it?
Well, the way I came into working with Looby was actually started whenever I became really interested in what was going on in the work that I was doing as a social worker, the work that I was doing in the world, where I could see a need for change. I was really feeling this crisis of disconnection all around me, and both personally and within the circles that I was operating and in the wider world. Not that the solutions weren't available, but that the problem was the people. And not that the people were the problem, actually, but that we had somehow lost our way. I had a longing for belonging. I say it's a kind of sense of, when I was young, I used to say to my mum, I feel homesick. And she didn't understand what I was saying, but there was this sense of a need for something that was bigger than myself, and a frame and a way of knowing what's going to happen next. And it took me on a journey of looking for ways that we can find deeper connection in the everyday. And that led me from social work to forest school to eco-psychology to rites of passage and life initiation. And along that way, I picked up the work of John Young and the 8 Shields, which is a model for creating the optimum conditions for connection. It's a model that enables people to work with the cycles of life in order to find a natural flow in designing events, designing the ways we live, designing the ways that we understand cycles, seasons, needs in groups and beyond. And it was the first thing that I found that really spoke to me of both practical and connection-based work, where the language was more about connection to self, connection to each other, and connection to the other than human world. And then through this, I first read the amazing book that Looby wrote, People and Permaculture, and that was like my really exciting Bible, because Looby had synthesized so many things that I was interested in: systems thinking and the work that reconnects, and all these ways of understanding how we could live better together as people. And then through the years, I became more familiar with the work that Looby's been cultivating through time, and her book Cultural Emergence came into being. And through our mutual connections, we then began starting to work together as the co-facilitators of the Peace, Empowerment and Cultural Emergence program, which we do annually now, which is a really beautiful way of experiencing an embodied culture of peace and emergence, so that with an understanding of what the principles of cultural emergence can bring us.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you. Just before we move to Looby and look at those principles of cultural emergence, give me a concept of the timescale. How long have you two been working together? And how far before that, Leona, did you connect with John Young's work?
So Looby and I will be running our 4th annual program. We also have run online programs together in that time. About 3 years before that, we met at the Art of Mentoring program, which is one of the programs that develop the 8 Shields as a model for working, and it's an embodied experience, a camp. It's now evolved from the Art of Mentoring camp in the UK to be called the Nature Culture Connection Camp, which is happening again this year, and which is also where I bumped into you last year, which was fabulous. But so yeah, I've been working with the 8 Shields for I would say about 10 years, and the 8 Shields has been something that's underpinned the business that I was part of founding, which is a nature connection business in the north of England, Live Wild Community Interest Company, which I've now resigned as director of, but runs amazing and beautiful programs, and has led to this work that we're doing now, which is more specifically around cultural emergence and how to create and be part of a culture that speaks the language that is needed so that we can live differently.
Right. Yes. Very Thrutopian. Thank you. Okay. So, Looby, just before we go to the framework of cultural emergence, which I want to know more of and how it works and what the language is that helps us to live differently, because words frame who we are. How long have you been working with the John Young work and everything that goes with it?
So, my book, People in Permaculture, came out in 2012. And then 2015-16 was when I got connected personally with John Young, although I'd already been familiar with his work before that. But that was when we came into collaboration with each other. And that was actually when we moved to Applewood Permaculture Centre, and it was our first course that we did together was a week after we moved in here. So it's my journey with his work has been very interwoven with my journey with Applewood Permaculture Centre, which and being on the land here, being part of the ecosystem and the web of life that is Applewood. And so it was an amazing introduction into the deep nature connection and being here and listening to the landscape in a really expansive way, and feeling part of the web of life here. So I can't kind of separate those two strands in my life. Cultural Emergence and Applewood came into being in the same time in 2016, and then I wrote my book in 2020, which there was a convenient pandemic that meant that writers could
everybody had some lockdown time.
Could really focus on writing. And then the card deck came out 23.
Right. Again, probably birthed during the pandemic, which was an incredibly fertile time in many ways, horrible though it was.
Yeah, so I sort of say it's the conspiracy of all the writers that wanted to finish their books.
Yeah. Let's not. We'll
Let's
end up
not
with
go
people
down
telling
there.
us we killed lots of people in order to finish our books. I don't think that's exactly how it happened. All right. So let's stay with Looby. Tell us more about the language that'll take us forward to something else. I'm interested in how it's evolved. I'm interested in how it landed previously. And I think we booked this podcast 6 months ago. I have a 6-month lead. 6 months ago, the world felt somewhat saner than it feels now. And I'm kind of interested in how it's evolving and what the spirits of the land are telling you about where we might go. But let's start on solid ground with the framework of cultural emergence first.
Yeah, so I think what I'd like to do now is share the poem that I wrote about cultural emergence, which actually grew over a 9-month period from the sort of the starting of like let's do a course together and seeing our overlap of that was culture, and then thinking and then growing from there. What does that mean? What does it mean to come into this emergent space and co-create from there? And then the whole premises of cultural emergence, that actually the problems we're facing at the moment in this world are cultural, including climate change, including social justice problems. They're cultural problems at the heart, and if we shift culture, then we can shift the problems into the solutions. So yeah, this poem emerged from this time, and it will kind of, I think, set the scene for the bigger vision as well. This cultural emergency calls for cultural emergence, a breaking through, a breaking free, of cultures of isms and schisms, of gun culture, war culture, rape culture, fear culture, greed culture, waste culture, chemical culture, of corporations controlling our culture, polluting our culture, peeling back the layers of oil smothering our culture. Can we connect our roots into the earth and reach out to fellow beings and show our care? Can we cultivate a responsibility culture, friendship culture, kindness culture, justice culture, safety culture, peace culture, a culture of innovation, resilience and hope? Can we name and create the culture we want? Visionary, regenerative culture. Can we shift our priorities, phobias, patterns, parameters, opinions, assumptions? Can we bend or bury our beliefs? Will we? Will we reflect, connect, respect the collective, direct our objections to the system that promotes disconnection? Challenge, not blame, name and reframe, shift our perspective to gain a directive that allows us to be receptive to the interconnected web vibrating with every step. Disrupt the pattern to awaken and challenge, and begin to unravel cords of conditioning to release the story and create space for visioning, allowing for the possibility of the seemingly impossible to motivate and invigorate the genius inside of us. Activate and initiate, appreciate and celebrate, collaborate and participate, to co-create and facilitate the desire to germinate and take control of our fate, moving away from this state of emergency into a state of fertile cultural emergence, where we use emergence to support emergence, with the divergence and convergence of minds creating designs, with the intelligence of cooperating heart to give us a start on this path of empowerment. To bring fulfillment and deep nourishment, it requires commitment to trusting the process and opening to osmosis of the mystical and magical to be alchemical with the mathematical, for practical and logical action, to bring connection and emerge the solutions for manifestation of personal and global transformation.
Wow. Thank you. That's a whole podcast just in itself, isn't it, really? We could go line by line and explore it.
Yeah, there are, so within the poem, there are some of the tools embedded, like one of the principles here of allow for the possibility of the seemingly impossible.
Right.
That is one of the principles of cultural emergence. And I think, we could do a whole podcast on just that principle.
Well, I was going to say which bit stands out for you. So because I've written down some of the bits that stood out for me, but let's go with that. Go a little deeper, Looby, and then we'll come to Leona for what stood out for her.
I was looking for the card of that one. So we've got with the allowing for the possibility of the seemingly impossible.
Oh, nice. So for the people who are not watching the video, that's a heart in green, basically.
And it's an impossible. It's like a Mobius strip.
Yeah, it's a Mobius heart. Clever.
And on the back of the card it says, "Give voice to your heart's desire. Widen parameters of possibility. Stay engaged with searching for solutions."
So before you go into that, what is your heart's desire that you would give voice to now?
Wow. I mean, so many things. I think the thing that just popped into my head when you asked that question was about feminine leadership and raising up the feminine voice, and really and women's rights, which we're really seeing is a hot topic and something that is being eroded around the world at the moment in shocking ways. So that was the thing that popped into my head when you said that. And so we're giving voice to that, and then widening the parameters of possibility. What does that actually mean to us, and how can we really extend those possibilities? So that really so that we do. And then the next point is staying engaged with searching for solutions. It's like, rather than saying, well, that's impossible, that won't happen, to actually saying, well, how could it happen? What would it look like? Let's stay visioning. Let's not just write that off as an impossible dream, so we don't even bother looking for the solution. It's like, okay, actually that is possible. How would that happen? And just to take it back into a smaller scale, more sort of maybe relatable example was I had repetitive strain injury, like on my right arm, a very writer's injury, and I was just kind of living with it, and just trying to sort of manage it. And then it was like, actually, what would it look like if I really imagined that it wasn't possible for it to be cured? How would I then be looking for the solutions, rather than just accepting it as a status quo and just kind of trying to live with it and work around it? It's like, how could I actually engage with that possibility of it going and being cured? And I did do a whole, and so then I took it into the design process, the design web, which we can come to later.
No, tell us now, because I want to go to Leona in a moment and take it elsewhere, and we'll never remember to come back.
Design. So the design web is a framework which I created while writing People and Permaculture. It's a non-linear, holistic framework that explores patterns and limits, and you create a design from it. And even just by entering into design is looking for solutions and finding ways out, finding ways to move through things. And it's very emergent process because we're designing with people. So people are not the same as apple trees. They have emergent properties when you engage with
trees
design.
Have emergent properties. But go on, tell just really specifically. Talk to us what you did with your RSI, because I think this is really interesting to people. You didn't accept. Probably Western medicine would say you either take steroids or that's it. Basically, lose the use of your right arm. And you said no. There's a possibility of healing. If I open to the possibility of healing, then the world becomes a different place by my opening to it. I'm suddenly aware, facing a huge amount of work, reading Karen Barad and Bayo Komolafe, and the fact that actually reality is what we make it to be. in ways that are really hard to get our heads around. And I'm also remembering Oscar Maria Quesada of consciousness creates matter, language creates reality, ritual creates relationship. And just by the language of healing is possible, your reality shifts. And without getting into fake quantum physics, which really annoys me, how did you go about a design process of changing your relationship with your RSI, and what happened?
So I looked at, so it has 12 anchor points. So the vision, okay, so letting go of it, working through it, limit. So, and like what limits were there? What were the, what limits did I need to put in? So like, okay, where isn't there a limit? Like where am I pushing through, and where do I need to actually take a break? So pause, looking at different ways to exercise. So going to the needs of what do I need in terms of exercises to strengthen or to loosen, how to use my left arm more. So that was one of the needs to bring more balance in. And see, also really through this process became aware of how much it was a cultural problem as well. So when I say personal problems are also cultural problems, like how much do we have to use our right arm? And I think anyone that is left-handed will be like, yes, I already know that. But for me, being right arm, it was just like, oh, actually, now I'm trying to use my left arm more. I'm really seeing how right-handed and dominant the world is created, that you're constantly that the automatic hand that gets used. So I went through these 12 anchor points, and I was doing it on the back of a calendar, because they also conveniently have 12 pages on them. And then I realized that the calendar, I think my mother-in-law had given it to me, and then I realized that the calendar, all the paintings in there were painted by people with their hands or their feet, people that didn't have hands. So that was just a real moment for me of like, wow. And so appreciation really came in, really appreciating my hands for all the things they do, and really sending that appreciation to my arms, and doing fun things with my hands as well. So giving them sort of opportunity to express and be joyful and not just working. And yeah, it really, really, really shifted my relationship with it. And also one of the things that is really important when I do designs is about naming the design. So I didn't name the design repetitive strain injury, because then I'm just repeating it. So I named it regenerative arm movement. And so that was what I was kept on bringing in: regenerative arm movement, regenerative arm movement. And my awareness has come to it very differently. So now, the moment I feel it, I'm like, okay, stop, intervene, do something different, stretch it, make sure I bring in the yoga. So I'm more able to catch it early and intervene, rather than sort of ignoring it, pushing through and letting it grow into a bigger problem when then it's just like, stop, you can't do anything but stop. So it's shifted it, and I've not had acute issues with it since, and that's been several years now. Yeah.
Right. That is so interesting. I assumed you were going to say, so I found this practitioner who did, I don't know, acupuncture, and somebody else did homeopathy, and somebody else who did herbs, and somebody else who did Pilates, Tai Chi, whatever. And actually, it was much more about, I'm hearing, I think, awareness and allowing your arm to have its own voice within your own internal and external systems. It's really interesting.
Yes.
Super.
Yeah, really listening to it and really changing my relationship with my arm, and therefore with the injury, and repatterning in that. Yeah. Patterns into a really big, important anchor point in the design web.
And finding the technology, because something similar, way back when I was writing the Boudica books, I started mousing left-handed, and I, in the end, had to find an ergonomic left-handed mouse that would actually work with the software of my computer. and brushing my teeth left-handed and all of those things. And you're right, it changes the balance. And it changed in the days when I was writing. It transformed my writing. I had no idea how much I was imposing my right-handedness on the consciousness that I was engaging with when I was writing, as in the consciousness of the horse or the pony, until I wasn't. And it was really
That's fascinating, yes, because I do find I use my left hand for my mouse as well. And I do find when I'm writing and I'm typing, it's bringing in both sides of my brain. And especially if I've got music on and I'm stand desk is also being my crucial thing from that. Yeah, that's really.
Gosh, we could do a whole other podcast on ergonomics of writing, but let's not. We need to talk to Leona for a while. Leona, I want to ask you as well. What is your heart's desire? It's probably evolved since we asked Looby a few minutes ago, but if you were to express that now, what is your heart's desire in this moment?
What I feel is personally, and what I feel and see around me is a need for coming back into what I call connected self-leadership, a way where we start to live in a way that enables us to recognize our interconnectedness with the other than human world and with each other through and what I'd love to see is cultures, communities, families that really take seriously the stages of life, really take seriously their commitment to going out and listening to the land and being with the land and learning to understand themselves in relation to nature as a mirror for our growing consciousness, because I think we're learning and growing so much. We're in such incredible times right now that where we have the power, the availability, the accessibility to learn anything we want to learn.
Right. Well, learn with our heads anything we want to learn, but you're talking about learning with what I would call heart mind.
And I also believe this is growing because of the accessibility that we have to teachers, ways of being, ways of understanding, which isn't separate from. It is an ancient way of knowing, and it is something that through our human animal body, we have a capacity to do at much a deeper level than what we get told we can do through our education systems and through society. But actually, we have we now are being brought the tools through many ways, through people who are relearning themselves and remembering and coming in and listening to what the world wants, and through other cultures sharing and bringing their ways of being, and through models that are bringing and helping us to do simple things that enable us to live in a different way. And that different way is about holding intentional space for ourselves and for each other. And it's also about recognizing that there is so much to learn from what we've once known through other ways of being, but also through what we now know through biohacking and human optimization and all the things that come with the life coachy world that I'm in, which tell us what ceremony and ritual have told us all along. They're sort of the science-backed versions of what connection cultures will have taught us all along, that gratitude matters, that listening matters, that being together in natural environments and with the elements and at times of transition, we pay attention to what wants to come in next. And for me, that's about creating space, and it's also about visioning. One of the words, the phrases from the poem is create space for visioning, disrupt the pattern, challenge and awaken. It's about being in a place where we can start to dream in the world that doesn't exist right now, because if it already existed, we'd already a dream, we'd already be doing it.
Yes. Gosh, there's so much in that. Talk to me a little bit more about the life stages that you see existing and how we could step into those more fully.
Mm. I want to talk about it in a way that isn't connected to any particular tradition, because obviously, we all have a life stage. We move from baby to child to young to teen to young adult to childbearing age and beyond, and yet I think the loss of rites of passage and recognition of those life stage transitions has contributed to somewhat of a meaninglessness to what's next. But everything has a life cycle, doesn't it? We have, and if we understood as women, the cycle of the moon and in relation to our bodies better, it's really only in the last couple of years that I've really, really paid attention to that and noticed how differently I behave in that cycle. But also, I guess in relation to the times of year, each time of year, and this is how some of the ways that we tune into using the 8 shields as part of the ways of connecting to nature is recognizing the new beginnings of spring and the setting of the sun and the energy of the autumn and the harvesting and the all the ways that come with the qualities of a time of year we can apply to cycles within cycles within cycles.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. One of the things we lean into quite heavily on the podcast is, first of all, the concept of initiation culture versus trauma culture, which I'm sure you are familiar with. Because in my world, what we're trying to move towards is an initiation culture. And Bill Plotkin also has life stages, and he divides them quite cleanly into childhood, adolescence, adulthood, elderhood, and 2 stages within which. And in his view, a lot of our dominant culture, the hegemonic, Western educated, industrial rich, and until the 20th of January, at least notionally democratic, the weird culture is locked in early adolescence. And we could get to be 110 and still basically be in early adolescence because we don't have the elders to help us to find the meaning in life. And finding the meaning of life, in his view, is part of the shift from adolescence to adulthood. When we are adult, we know who we are. We know why we're here. We have that sense of being, belonging, becoming. That is, I think, the coming home. You said earlier on that you told your mother that you were homesick. And I think part of the home that we want to come to is that place where we can land and think, this is what I'm here for. Mm-hmm. And my understanding of 8 Shields work is that you are able to help people to grow up effectively, to give them a sense of rites of passage and a sense of being, belonging, becoming. Leona, can you talk a little bit more about that? And then we'll come back to Looby. If I'm right, and if I'm not, then say so.
Mm-hmm. Part of what we would call an embodied experience of a culturally emergent culture community that might be underpinned by the 8 shields, that might be underpinned by the principles of cultural emergence, would be that there are spaces and times created within that enable people to address the different things that might come up. And part of that is to acknowledge grief, to acknowledge the cycles of death and rebirth, to acknowledge the need for change and honoring change, and that change happens and that it isn't always a terrible, awful thing. Obviously, tragedy happens, but actually, if we had the tools, the practices, ways of helping us to process change as and when it happens as part of an inherent understanding that this is part of life, then a lot of the, what people are a lot calling trauma or challenge that people are experiencing wouldn't be half as destructive. It wouldn't seep out sideways. It wouldn't infect relationships in such negative ways, because we would be part of an understanding that grief is normal and natural, that it can be held, that that it is a process, it's not a way of being, that it changes, and that healthily doing grief, that creating spaces where that's possible, acknowledges the importance of it and the need for it, rather than the silencing of it, which mostly I think we see. And in these times, obviously, there's the normal and natural cycles of life which bring change, challenge, death, rebirth, but there's also what's going on around the world, which is bringing a huge amount of grief, whether we know it or not. Unprocessed grief, unprocessed stress, worry, anxiety, anxiousness, because of the amount of information that we're party to, because of what we see that we never would have seen before, and because of the reality of the global carnage. It's a lot. It's a lot for us, and I think, having simple and healthy practices. So in an embodied experience of a gathering, the 8 Shields or one of our Cultural Emergence in-person programs, we really aim to give people the tools to both connect just through the senses, through the body, through that opening, remembering that we're not just the mind, that we're also the heart and the body and the interconnected spirit, if you want to use that word. And that through those ways of knowing, we can resource ourselves, and we can also release and let go, and we can listen and be part of, rather than trying to look at and long for connection to something other. And we also bring in these ways of being as humans that people have done for generations and do all over the world in many cultures, of singing and playing and being really, much more of our wild self. And I think that these gatherings, where we can experience just a little bit of that safety of knowing that there are elders who will catch the if there's any discontent within the group, they will hold space for that. There are grief process throughout the period of time that you're there. There is joy and celebration each morning and every evening, a gathering of stories. And, this is built into a culture that is regenerative, and that should be and could be built into a culture that's regenerative. And that's what I would love to see more of.
Yes, wouldn't that be amazing? And I think I want to stay with you just for a moment, the eco-psychology of this. It seems to me a number of things we need to evolve. I have a new set of asks, which are clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean, clear, courageous connections between all parts of ourselves, between ourselves and each other, and between ourselves and the web of life. And my feeling is that if everybody committed to those as their priorities, the world would be a different place within 24 hours. But we don't have the tools. And particularly the all parts of ourselves, each other, ourselves, and the web of life. Most people fall over at each stage of that, because our culture has all been about disconnection from ourselves, each other, and the web of life. And there seems to be a narrative that is widespread in certain parts of the yes, but we'll never make it narrative, that says the grief is overwhelming. Once I start to grieve, I will never stop. And that grief and joy are mutually incompatible. And my personal experience is the more I open and let the grief and, frankly, the terror, those parts of me that are afraid, and honor those and give them space and engage with them, the more I am also able to fall in love with the practice, with the magic of being and the web of life, and be open to the web of life. And I wonder, with your experience as an eco-psychologist, and within the kind of life coachy role, and within the cultural emergence, first of all, am I right, or am I somehow off beam, that grief and joy are not mutually exclusive, and that it's possible to learn how to express both, that this is a relearning, that this is actually an integral part of our birthright as human beings? Do you want to just riff off that?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, I would say you can't have one without the other, because what happens when we open ourselves to the beauty and wonder and magic of what we're part of, when we really, really connect to the tiniest ways of knowing, and also the vastness of and majesty of the universe, we feel it. And then when things within that are disconnected and are seemingly continually disconnected, it hurts. And a feeling person would feel that. Um, but so much of us is closed down. And to keep ourselves safe, and in order to be able to function in the world that asks us and forces us to get up and get on no matter what.
Yeah, to ignore the cycles of the moon, so that every day has to be exactly the same, regardless of the fact that we're actually in a sine wave, and then there's eclipses and everything is changing, and yet we are got to somehow become this little automaton. Is that as much as it was? I mean, in my world it isn't anymore, but then I have an enormously privileged life. Are most people still expected to behave exactly the same every day? Yeah, Libby's nodding.
What I'm seeing is what I'm, I have this frustratingly, to some people, positive outlook, because what I'm seeing is more and more people's recognition of what, for example, 20 years ago, yoga was quite radical, even 10, hey?
Really?
But there's not really very many people now who I know who certainly don't know what yoga is, but who haven't even tried it, or mindfulness, or meditation, or presence,
or Tai Chi, or something.
Tai Chi, or all of these things. So it's like things are becoming more. There's more of an understanding of the positive effects of all of these ways of being, presence and connection. And also, we weren't meant to do things alone, and our lives have forced us to be separate and in our little bubbles. But actually, what I'm hearing and seeing are groups and people searching for all of these different ways where they can come together in communities of purpose. And one of the things, that I do worry about is the amount of time we spend looking at screens and online. But one of the things I really love about that is the number of people that we get to meet all around the world, from many different ways of being and cultures. There is a certain demographic, obviously, not obviously, but it's true that there's a sort of certain demographic of people who can and do reach these courses. But at the same time, I've come to know lots of people through the Cultural Emergence online programs, through my Connection Matters membership program, which is, group calls with people from all over. And I love that, that's, I'm also not I'm just living my own life. And yes, and I have children in mainstream school now. They didn't used to be. They were always home-eded, but now they're in mainstream school.
Scary.
They're doing fine. They've had a lot of support and encouragement and nature connection throughout their lives, and ways of being, and access to connection. And I find that they're healthy. And I'm feel really fortunate to be alive now, because I feel like, it's that critical mass, isn't it? Once there's enough people who feel and believe and know that another world is possible, then actually we start to see it everywhere. And I see it everywhere. I choose to see it everywhere. And that's part of which wolf do you feed?
Yes. And for people who don't know it, very briefly before we go to Looby, just give us the wolf metaphor, because it's beautiful.
I read it again recently, actually. So it's it really speaks to me that there is an angry wolf. There's a little girl who feels angry all the time, and she doesn't know why she's angry all the time. And she meets an elder on a hill who says, "Well, I used to see that angry wolf, but I also see this patient and happy and confident and thoughtful wolf. And she says, but how do you know which one to go with? How do you make one stronger than the other? And the elder said, well, choose which one you feed. Which one do you give time to? Which one do you spend time with? Which one do you choose to want to listen to? And they're both there. But actually, the one that I choose to feed is the one that enables me to see possibility everywhere. And
my IFS self is going, yes, but you need to honour the other one and help it to unburden and talk to it and give it space and not crush it and put it away. That the healing, the integration, the self-integration comes from honouring all parts of ourselves. But yes, and in the wider world as well, it seems to me we are now at a crisis point where the energies that feed on hate and despair and fear and terror and pain are being very well fed. But also, actually, when I connect into the web of life as best I can and feel the gratitude and compassion and the joyful curiosity, the web feels more alive now than it has ever done. And I think there are more people tapping in and feeding that, choosing to feed gratitude and compassion and joyful curiosity. And that is as much because they're feeding the wolf of gratitude as well as the wolf of fear. So, thank you. Perfect. All right. Looby, there is so much that we've talked about and so much that's open and rich. And I really want to come back to cultural emergence and the concept of that, because it seems to me we are at a moment where the old hegemonic culture is actually being taken apart with a chainsaw, in metaphorical terms and actually not so metaphorical terms. Things that we all believe to be true are being shown actually to be a part of a cultural assumption that is easily broken. And yet, you and I, all three of us, exist in a world where we understand systems thinking and complexity. And linear thinking says I pull lever A and event B happens. And complexity says the moment I approach lever A, B has moved. And pulling lever A will do an uncounted number of things that I cannot predict. And so what gives me hope is that however much those who want to control everything think they can pull lever A and event B will happen, the one thing we can say for sure is that that's not actually true. And the cracks are where the light gets in. And so in terms of cultural emergence, I really would like to explore how you are seeing and feeling the ripple effects of what's happening with your courses, with the wider movement of all of these things, moving out into the world. Where are the green shoots? Where are the sparks of light that will become the tsunami that takes us to a tipping point of a different world? And if we were pouring all of our awareness and all of our language and all of our thinking into that world, what would be the new values that we would live by? Does that make sense as a question? And is it something that you'd happy to riff with?
Yeah, so, well, there's lots in there. I mean,
there was.
You've really, let's go to Emergence for a while, because that's what you've just described there with the non-linear world. And I think that is what gives me hope, and that is what's exciting. And emergence is all around us, so much so that we take it for granted, that we, and so that there are recipes for emergence as well, like the recipe of putting the ingredients of a cake together and then putting it into the oven. That is an emergent process, that we have parameters then of what will happen, the parameters of that emergence. Whereas if you give a cardboard box to a child to play with, their parameters of emergence are much wider than what would happen with a cake. And what we're seeing now in the world is that the parameters of emergence are much wider, because the rules of the game seem to have changed. The powers that be in some places are changing the rules of the game, and so the emergence is changing as well, and the possibilities for that, and the organising that is happening is different. There is just a different coming together of people. And I think that's where going back to the cake, is actually the baking powder that literally gives rise to the cake. The smallest ingredient actually changes the whole cake. And if we think about that for ourselves, like maybe we feel like we're the smallest person or have the smallest impact, but we don't actually know how that will change the entire system.
Yes.
And
yes. Each of us is an acupuncture point, effectively, and we don't know what the ripples might be. Yeah.
Exactly. We don't know who we might inspire, what effect our words have, what effect our actions have, where all of that that empowerment and those ripples go. And also there are some recipes within that. So when we come together like on the courses and people go, wow, this is amazing. What an amazing group of people. And it's like, well, actually, we've created the container where the best parts of people show.
Everybody's amazingness came to the surface. Yes.
Yes.
And you have a self-selecting group of people who wanted to come in the first place. There's a lot of conditions for making good cakes.
Exactly. So we've chosen good ingredients, or good ingredients have come forth, and we have a good container for that. So the recipe is there and good processes that we use. And Applewood is the wisest facilitator on the team as well, and the biggest nurturer. So there are, conditions that we created for that positive, fertile emergence, and so what we're seeing at the moment is that there's a lot of kind of different forces on people. There's one, as we've talked about, that fear and that terror that like the us and them is happening really strongly. And then on the other side is a sense of like, no, like this can't happen on our watch, and like, let's organize, let's resist, let's change things, let's vision differently, let's empower ourselves, let's empower other people. So though both of those forces, I think, are happening simultaneously. And connecting with what Leona was talking about with the wolves, it's like, where do we put our attention? Where do we encourage each other and connect and empower each other, as well as empowering ourselves?
Okay, and that gives us two very clear branches. Shifting the energy slightly, I am looking at what's happening in the US, and I would say the US has now undergone an internal coup and is now an Axis power, and we have people in charge for whom violence is an option, and they're using it. And you lead courses on peace, and I absolutely believe that if we're going to emerge into a new system, that one of the core values has to be that power over is not an option. No problem is solved from the mindset that created it, and the mindset of power over is what created the chaos we have just now. And yet, I remember a lot reading Starhawk's book, the name of which currently escapes me. One of you will remember years ago, like back in the 90s. And she's set up in California. There's the people protecting the water and the people trying to take the water, which are the good guys and the bad guys. And it's quite old paradigm thinking. But the end of the book is the people who believe in peace walking forward into the guns, saying, I love you, rank after rank after rank after rank, until the people shooting decide not to keep shooting. And that always struck me as, that's not how it works. I have never, at any point, anywhere in the world, seen the people who enjoy killing other people decide it's not a good idea just because they've shot enough. Doesn't happen. Otherwise, there'd be a lot of living pheasants on our hill, frankly. And I wonder how we envision a peaceful way forward. And I'm asking both of you, because I'm aware that I have just shifted the energy of this space, but it is a question I am being asked a lot. What do we do when we believe absolutely there is a peaceful way forward? How do we shift the energy? How do we do the connecting to the land, connecting to the web of life, in a way that feeds, let's say, the wolf of regeneration and consensus and connection, in the face of a wolf that basically eats faces? Over to either of you, but Looby's unmuted, so let's go with Looby first.
Well, it is a massive question, isn't it? Her book was The Fifth Sacred Thing, and yes, it is just such a massive, impossible question that, going back to allowing for the possibility of the seeming impossible, and it can seem totally out of reach. Yeah, it's a question that keeps me up at night, and I don't really have the answers. Of course, we don't have the answers individually, we have the answers collectively. And that is where, if we keep asking those questions and keep connecting, and it is a change of culture as well, because these people that are doing the violence, they are within the culture that allows that to happen. So that is where the shift has happened now, that the parameters for acceptable violence against women and minorities has expanded. And so this is where I think this really part of the toolkit is awareness of culture, and to really extend that, because we've used the word so many times and no one would probably have said, well, hold on a minute. Let's just say, what do we mean by culture? Because it's a word that is used all the time. And yet, when you try and explain it, then you'll sort of start going down, well, it's the country you're part of, or it's the like high culture of opera or something. And it's not, it's those things and a lot more. So my working definition of culture is that it is a complex, interconnected web of seen and unseen patterns of thinking, being, doing, and interacting. So how do we interact with the work, with the land? How do we interact with other people, and the other, and how do we interact with ourselves? Yes, ourselves and our own values. And one of the things that I think that many people don't think of, or that people think that culture is out there, it's something out there and immovable. But I like to take that complex web and say, well, actually, we each have our own individual complex web. We each have our individual personal culture that is like a mosaic of all the cultures we're part of, all the macro and micro cultures we're part of, and that we have responsibility for that personal culture, to weed out the negative cultural conditioning, to water the healthy habit, to tend our own personal culture. And then that ripples out into all the other cultures we're part of, in small ways or big ways. In our family culture is a big way, in the bigger macro cultures it's a small way, but as we say, we don't know where those ripples go. And so when we really pay attention to culture, then we can shift what are the technological solutions. So at the moment it's like, oh, what are the technological solutions to climate change? But they're still coming from the paradigms of extractivism. So electric cars are still coming from the paradigms of, well, we're going to get the minerals from some country that we'll just mine and pollute communities from, and that's okay because that's outside of there, but we're doing our bit in here. This hasn't changed the paradigm that those technologies are coming from. And the politics hasn't changed because it's coming from the same cultural paradigms. So when we change culture, we can change politics, we can change language, we can change technology, we can change all of our interactions, we can change our agriculture. All of those things can change when we start shifting culture, which is why I see it's such an important thing for us to really expand our awareness and our language around, and to start seeing how we can shift that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so Leona, coming to you, we're heading towards the top of the hour, but I really want to get deep into shifting cultural paradigms now, because it seems to me this is what we can do. And we know from the pandemic that an R number of 3 spreads something all the way around the world. if each of us changes and talks to 2 other people and their values shift and they talk to other people and their values shift, 6 weeks and the values of the world have shifted. So I'm interested in a number of things. What are the stories that we tell ourselves and each other about ourselves and each other that help us to shift the paradigm? And are there any other ways of really practically creating cultural emergence that people listening can do? Clearly, they should all come in your course. But if we're reaching tens of thousands of people, what narrative shifts are there? What behavioral shifts are there? And I think we tend to get into the, okay, we just have to basically go back to living a medieval life, which nobody is going to do. So it's not practical. But there will be, I think there's conceptual shifts. There's ways of framing who we are and how we see ourselves that are within reach. And then when we get to there, we move another step. And I wonder what for you would be the early steps to give people. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the first ideas to play with is that rather than letting life happen to us, we have agency and choice. And when we see ourselves as creators, when we see ourselves with that potential, we live much more consciously, much more intentionally within our own environment. And that's what starts to enable us to see the changes that happens organically as soon as you start to do that. One of the simplest things is to look at how we're choosing to live. How are you choosing to spend your time? How are you choosing? Who are you choosing to spend your time with? How are you choosing to spend your money and time? Because we feel like, or we tell ourselves the story that we have to do these things a certain way because life demands it. We feel like and tell ourselves a story that we're just stuck in the rat race or the hamster wheel. But are we really? Are we really? And I don't want to sound flippant. I absolutely recognise that for some people, life can be and is much more challenging than for others. But at each moment, we have choice in how we respond rather than reacting to what comes. We have a choice in a moment. And that really comes down to building the muscle of presence, building the muscle of what we would call in the 8 Shields and in Cultural Emergence, the core routines for connection. Those are a set of routines that enable us to start to learn how to listen to ourselves, how to notice more about what's around us, and then how to create space in order to take the next steps consciously. For example, one would be what we call the sit spot. A sit spot. So that is taking some time to visit a place repeatedly, the same place, and another core routine is opening the senses, so sensory awareness. And so in a sit spot, at a sit spot, we're opening the senses, and we're also able to, so that enables us to come into our bodies. It enables us to let go of anything that's happened that might need letting go of energetically or emotionally, or and then we start to feel and notice things like the cycles of the day. What time is it? What do the birds do at that time? Who else is out and about in my community? I live in terraced houses, and I love to go out in the evening. At that time, it's kind of dusky and the bats start flying around, and I can start to hear the human sounds slowly bubble down. But then there's also one house that particularly wakes up at that time. And I used to feel a bit frustrated. I wish I lived in the middle of nowhere, but actually I've started to see humans as part of, when as I changed my story, that we are nature, and and to love the place I'm in, I started to enjoy the signs of life and other people's interactions with what they're doing. And actually, you know, do we choose to see ourselves as inherently basically good or basically bad? Do we go out with the intention for connection and trust and belief in the goodness of people, or do we always put the barriers, the contraction and the resistance against being able to connect and see the good? And when you create more space, when you make choices about the kind of person you want to be, when you have a vision for a better way, then you start to see it when it happens. And more, for me, when I'm working with people, that's what we start with. We start with vision, then we look at where we're actually at, and then we look at how we're going to get there. And for me, everybody wants to live and choose. And actually taking small steps can make massive changes in a short space of time.
Yes. I was talking to Mark Fabian, who has written a book called Beyond Happy that I thought was going to be another self-help book, and actually it's much, much deeper than that. And that podcast will come out in a week's time or so. But he talks about everybody at a core level needs agency, competence. So you have to be able to make choices. You need to feel you're getting better at what your heart's desire wants to be good at, and connection to each other, to all parts of ourselves, to each other, to the web of life. He doesn't say that, but that's my addition on the top. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Imagine a world where everybody got to choose and got to be better at what their heart really sang for, and were connected in the ways that we've described. It would be amazing. And perhaps, again, I may be being overly optimistic here, but as I'm watching the social contract being destroyed, and not just in the US, our government over here is about to do appalling things. But communities will have to step up, I think. And if the government chooses to destroy the social contract, why would anyone else keep to it? What would we choose to create in our communities? Now, the requirement to just go and behave like an automaton or a hamster in a wheel is not there anymore. It opens possibility if we can step into it. Though I did hear a therapist the other day say, I can offer as much therapy as I like, but what people actually just need is money. And I think very quickly we're going to see what happens when the economy breaks down, and can we create some form of local flow of value. I noticed, this is as an aside, we're coming to Looby in a moment, but somebody pointed out that there had been a banking strike in Ireland that lasted 6 months. And those, mostly, if the bin men go on strike, it lasts about a week because you need people to collect your bins. The bankers went on strike for 6 months. And people were just writing checks to each other that basically counted as currency. Because eventually I will be able to cash this when the banking strike is over. They created their own currency. In the end, the bankers had to come back to work because nobody missed them. And I think, isn't that an interesting idea? What happens if a government just stops the social contract and we all go, okay, we're going to create our own money, so do you? Because you don't need our taxes. You make money out of nothing. Very, very quickly, I think modern monetary theory is going to rise to the top. And this fabrication that the government has to take taxes in order to pay anything else will be blown out of the water. And when that's gone, what comes in its place? Ford, who was a white supremacist, he would have loved Musk, a long, long time ago said that when people work out how money is created, there will be pitchforks on the streets. And I think in that he was right, and that moment is coming quite soon. And then the ideas that are lying around are the ones that will be picked up. And if there are enough ideas of connection and coherence and solidarity amongst communities, then the world changes. So we're way over time, as ever. Looby, let's come back to you for where has this taken you? What is most alive for you in this moment? And what would you like to say in closing?
Wow, well, we've really gone down many different routes, and my mind's like going, wow, yes. This is so important, this work. I think that's what's kind of really resonating with me in this moment. and to really invite people to explore and to be involved. And I've got a free Cultural Emergence taster course online, and just there's loads of possibilities for dipping your toes in or for going for deep immersion, and to be saying yes, and like to really think, well, how would I be responding to these tools if I had the belief that these tools were the things that we needed that would make the difference, that would enable us to move into the place we want to get to. And that, I think, really a valuable question to ask yourself. And just one last closing thought then. Joanna Macy talks about the Great Turning, and
That's now. We are in it.
And we're in the Great Turning, we're in the Great Unraveling, and some people are still in the business as usual. And where do we put our attention? And what I like to think of is like we're on a trajectory, but it's just a small shift that we need to take in this moment that really takes us to a very different place in the future. So it's not this huge shift that we need to make now. It's just like, how can we turn our attention towards that regenerative future that we want for the present and the future generations? And how do we turn our attention towards that and step up and step forth and speak out in small ways, in significant ways that make a difference in our own lives, as well as rippling out?
Fantastic. And I just flicked through my many, many pages of notes back to the beginning. You guys have a course on the 6th of May, a live course. Am I right on that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we've got a free online peace workshop. So if you'd like to come and spend time with us online for an experiential, embodied experience of peace, peace empowerment and cultural emergence, do join us, and we'll
Brilliant.
link.
Excellent. I will put a link in the show notes to that and to everything else that we've mentioned, to your books, to your CEED cards, to what Leona does. Leona, as we're closing, anything that you would like to say, give people ideas of what to do, or just to bring us to a close?
Thank you. I would say, the most important thing that we're doing now is building connection with ourselves, building connection with others, and really looking for those who are talking the way we want to hear, and who are doing the things that we want to do, and making choices really consciously. My podcast is called Connection Matters, because for me, connection matters. It's the key. And there I share conversations with, well, I've had 2 conversations with you already, Manda, but with other amazing change makers, including Looby, and other inspiring people, and also solo episodes from me, which feed into a little bit of what is keeping me ticking in these times. But I just, generally get out onto the land, don't think too much, get back into the body, and make the most of what you have, because this is what we have.
Yeah. And we're here for such a short time. And when you listen to the land, it has so much to say. I think that's really, really lovely place to end. So, Leona, thank you. I will absolutely put a link to Connection Matters, so everybody go and listen to Leona's podcast. Looby, thank you. I will put links to everything that you're doing. You have a new book coming out in September. Just as we close, tell us the title and I will put a link. I think I might put a link to that, or I'll put a link to your website and then it'll have places to go. Tell us the title of your new book.
It's called Design Adventures. How can we adventure into life and use our agency? So
fantastic. Yeah. And it will be available all around the world in September. Fantastic. Thank you both for coming on to the Accidental Gods podcast. It has been an absolute delight. And I think somehow together, we and everybody else, we can lay the foundations for a future that we would be proud to leave behind. There is still time. Thank you.